Hello Space Citizens! The Sega Mega Drive is famous for shoot-'em-up video games, and often when we talk about these we're referring to side-scrolling or vertical shoot-'em-ups. But today I want to talk about run-and-gun games because there are some really fun games in the Mega Drive library. Today I'm going to share some of the run-and-gun games that I've picked up over the years and talk about my opinions of them, so I hope you guys enjoy. So I'm starting my list alphabetically, meaning we come to this relatively obscure game first. Atomic Runner was first released in the arcades by Data East in January 1988, and its full title was Atomic Runner Chelnov, Nuclear Man the Fighter. You play as a man named Chelnov who survives a catastrophic nuclear disaster, and instead of being singed to a crisp or developing some kind of terrible radiation-induced illness, he instead develops superpowers. These powers are of interest to a secret organisation who wish to use them for evil, and thus you must fight to stop these mysterious tyrants. The arcade game has a colourful history to say the least, due to the significant amount of controversy surrounding its release. The initial loading screen, which featured a hammer and sickle, and the fact that Chelnov's name is spelled almost identically to Chernobyl in Japanese, leads to the criticism that the game was a cheap parody of the Chernobyl disaster. Although the game developers admit they changed the name to Chelnov when the Chernobyl power plant became something of a hot topic, this choice preceded the actual disaster and appears to have been a very unfortunate coincidence. By the time the Mega Drive version came out in 1992, significant changes to the plot were made to distance itself from the references to the Chernobyl disaster. I'm glad that the port still came out though, because it's a really fun game, and it plays quite differently to many other run-and-gun games on the system. The best way to describe it is as a cross between a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up and a platformer, because although you're running along the ground and have some loose control over the way you're facing and the speed at which you progress, you're forced along by a moving screen and can't simply stay in one place if you should wish to. This adds an interesting pressure to the gameplay. You have to think carefully about which way to move and when to jump, given that you can't simply turn and run back to avoid things. The concept takes a little getting used to, especially because you have to press a button in order to turn around, but once you get the hang of it, you'll find a rewarding game which is as quirky as it is difficult. The enemies you'll find are a mixture of bizarre and grotesque creations, some of them small and spider-like, and others large enough to fill most of the screen, and this does well to tie in with the idea of random radiation-induced mutants. The backgrounds for the stages are deliciously detailed, and you'll find yourself scrolling through some nice looking environments which are thematically and visually varied to keep things interesting. I found the boss fights in particular quite fun, especially as some of them allow you to move freely as though you're playing a platform game, but mostly because each one looks weirder than the last. I feel like the game's creators let their creative juices really flow on this one, and the bizarre creations they've come up with make a very fascinating visual mix. I suppose it's this mixture of good environments and interesting creatures that keeps me coming back to this title, even though I can't get very far in it. God damn it, this game is just so hard! I think the difficulty comes from a combination of challenging levels and cumbersome controls, which always take me a few attempts to get used to if I've been away for a while. However, if you can look past the odd controls, you'll find a charming and unique shooter that'll keep you entertained, and I'm glad to have this one in my collection. Now we're moving on to arguably one of the best looking games on the system, and indeed a game that's been nominated as one of the best games ever made. You don't need to play it for long to see exactly why. It's amazing to think that this is where Treasure started, and after releasing this in 1993, they'd go on to make such fantastic games as Dynamite Headdy, Ikaruga and Radiant Silvergun, to name but a few. They're a company who have made consistently solid games, and this title set the bar very high indeed. To me, this game hasn't aged at all. Its superb, vibrant, eye-catching visuals still look as good to me today as the first time I played it, and it's no wonder it's become highly collectible in recent years. It just looks absolutely amazing. What can I say? It's just one of the most beautiful Mega Drive games out there. The premise is pretty simple. You play as one of two characters, Red or Blue, who are part of a mercenary family, the Gunstars, who are trying to stop the Empire, a group seeking to power an ancient weapon using 4 hidden gems. The story is kind of derivative and largely irrelevant, to be honest, because whatever the plot is meant to be, it's largely dwarfed by the ingenuity and outright fun of the gameplay. This is much more true to the run and gun style. You can freely roam around the levels, aiming in multiple directions, and there are 2 firing modes available. A fixed shot in which you can stand still to fire, and a free shot in which you can run around while spraying bullets everywhere, which is my personal favourite. The really impressive thing though is the arsenal available. There are multiple shot choices, which include lasers and flamethrowers, and you can carry any two choices at a time, but the really interesting thing is that each combination allows unique firing modes which are a sort of hybrid between the two. It's very fun to experiment with the various options available, and you'll need to master changing between shot types to adapt to each situation. The game features some of the most enthralling and breathtaking level design I've ever experienced. Things progress at a breakneck pace, with a seemingly endless barrage of enemies on screen, bullets coming from all directions, and no slowdown to be found. So many different areas and scenarios are packed into each zone that it's almost impossible to stop playing as your eyes are just glued to the screen the whole time. Treasure have done a great job at mixing things up constantly so that the action never becomes stale, and this is particularly evident in the boss fights. The bosses tend to have multiple tricks up their sleeve, and the fights can carry on for a considerable time as you try to adapt to the ever-changing attack patterns. It was a pleasant surprise to see that at the end of the game, the last level becomes a sort of boss rush, in which all the previous bosses come back to haunt you. Everything is perfectly balanced between challenging and fun, and while the game is no walk in the park, it isn't deathly difficult either, which for a noob like me is much appreciated. I cannot recommend this game enough. I love everything about it. If you haven't played it before, you're in for a hell of a ride, and thankfully it's been ported to modern systems and is available on the Nintendo eShop for 3DS, so there's no excuse not to check this one out. Mega Turrican was developed by Factor 5 and released in 1994 on the Mega Drive, and every time I play it, I get a warm fuzzy feeling. It combines so many things that I like. A cool arsenal of weapons, an interesting main character with creative power-ups, and one of my favourite Mega Drive soundtracks. The music in this game is just perfect. It suits my taste really well and makes you feel so epic as you explode your way through the levels. This game is one of the more unique run and guns on the Sega Mega Drive. The whole thing just appears really crazy. The thing that sticks out to me the most though is that beautiful, beautiful music. You play as Bren Maguire, the sole survivor of the starship Avalon 1, which was destroyed by the Machine. After destroying his nemesis many years ago, the Machine returns again to seek revenge and to enslave humanity. Using the famous Turrican assault suit, Bren now seeks to banish the Machine once and for all. The plot is cheesy and the action over the top, but what do you expect from a Turrican game? I find the Turrican suit is really fun to play with. It includes the ability to grapple onto ledges to reach higher areas, and also to roll into a hard ball and crush enemies and lay mines everywhere. Using the various modes of the suit correctly is the key to success here, and one has to note the similarities to Samus's Morph Ball. The game differs from the original Amiga titles in the series, mostly in that the levels are noticeably shorter. However, as compensation the graphics are enhanced and include special effects and features that were not present in the older titles. This game was also released on the Amiga, albeit with slightly toned down graphics. Toward the later stages the game becomes pretty difficult, and alas I've never completed this game, but I will one day, because I keep chipping away at it. The boss fights start to get pretty intense the further in you get, so I think a bit more practice is needed. The main thing is that the experience is really enjoyable, because of the great space station environments and the belting music. I took a look on eBay out of curiosity to see what it goes for these days, and good god, it's on for £150 minimum. The world has gone crazy, so good luck trying to buy it. If there's a go-to run and gun for when my old uni buddies and me get together, it's this one. Many hours were lost when I should have been studying, trying to beat this back in the day. The game was released by Konami in 1994, and it remains one of my favourite Sega Mega Drive games. Most people would know this as Contra Hardcore, but for some weird reason the name was changed to Probotector for the PAL release. The plot follows on from Contra 3, in which a terrorist cell led by Colonel Bahamut has stolen an alien cell and plans to use it to create weapons. The previous heroes Bill Riser and Lance Bean are replaced with a new task force, the Hardcore. Again, somewhat bizarrely, the PAL release is different to its American counterparts, and all of the characters are replaced with robots. I'm not sure what the reason for this was, and it confused me when I moved from the NTSC to the PAL version, but I'm over it now, and I guess robots are kind of cool. The most notable thing about this game is that it's genuinely difficult, and I'd say that's part of its charm. It's a game you have to practice. You've got to learn the levels and the attack patterns if you want to beat it. The first time it seems daunting and you'll find yourself dying a lot, but a few playthroughs in and you'll start to anticipate what's coming next, and when you know what you're doing, it isn't too bad. I'd say that the challenge is why it's so addictive, because if you're anything like me, you'll want to keep pushing that little bit further until you finally beat it. The game never really grows stale thanks to the intensity of the action and also to the forking paths. You can decide which path to take and therefore mix things up a bit if you wish. The stages are again very varied. You can be running from a giant robot 1 minute and swinging from aircraft the next. It's another game that, quite like Gunstar Heroes, is simply mesmerising to play and hard to put down because you never quite know what's around the corner. I must say that I'm quite proud of myself for managing to beat this one, especially given that I'm not that amazing at video games usually. That should serve as a testament to how much I enjoyed it and how addictive it is. A word of warning though, the game is becoming increasingly hard to get hold of these days, and you may have a difficult time finding this one if you don't already own it. I picked this game up for about 40 quid back in the day, but if you check on eBay the price has absolutely skyrocketed, it's crazy. Overall, this is up there in my favourite Mega Drive games, and if you can find yourself a copy, I'd strongly recommend you spend some time with the hardcore. Ranger X is a game that could easily slip under the radar, and often appears on hidden gem or underrated Mega Drive game lists. There's a good reason why many of us feel this game deserves more love. It attempts so many interesting and groundbreaking things. It was released in 1993 by GAU Entertainment, a company you may know for their hand in the Time Crisis games, Dino Crisis and Shenmue. Not many people seem to have heard about this one, and I only came across it due to the YouTube gaming community, but it's a game I'm glad to have in my collection. You play as Ranger X, a futuristic soldier powering a mech suit, fighting for his home planet against the Rahuna forces. It's all very sci-fi and futuristic, and for that reason it looks very gorgeous. The worlds are full of interesting technology and mechanized enemies, giving you a ton of things to shoot and destroy. The part of this game that makes it stand out is the variety of options you have in terms of your mech suit, which has a jetpack that you'll be using to propel yourself into the air, and multiple firing modes including special power attacks that deal more damage. The other very cool thing is that you can get a kind of mech motorbike, which you can control separately, and even attach yourself to, Transformers style, to change your attack approach. It's this combination of running, flying and biking that makes the action feel very varied. Upon its release, the game received critical acclaim due to its graphics style. The colour palette is beautiful and the pixel art fantastic. Ranger X looks very badass, and there's been a lot of attention to detail in the level design. One thing that's always impressed me with it is the use of 3D in the level intros, something always impressive to see given the hardware limitations. The drawback to this game is that it's very difficult, mostly because the combat is so frantic, with multiple enemies firing at you at once, and the controls are a little bit fiddly as well. The way you beat the levels is by destroying the allocated number of targets. These are usually machine type things scattered throughout the levels, which can be taken on in any order, making the game quite flexible. However, I often find myself dying before I can dispatch them all due to the onslaught of bullets and missiles. When I do manage to finish the levels and see the bosses, I'm never disappointed. These are often hulking machines or odd creatures that make you feel part of some twisted dystopian universe. I think the main reason I'd recommend this game is because of the innovative mechanics and the graphics. The gameplay side of things is a little less strong. I can find it a bit messy and overall slightly frustrating due to the difficulty, so I'll leave you to make your minds up on this one. Now we come on to the excellent home conversion of a classic arcade game, Rolling Thunder 2. The arcade cab was released in 1990 and the Mega Drive port a year later in 91. The game is set in the 1990s and the Geldra organisation from the original game are back, this time attempting to destroy the world's space satellites. You play as one of two members of the Rolling Thunder task force, either as a dashing gentleman or an elegant lady. Apart from cosmetics, I can't actually find any difference between the two characters in terms of the gameplay. The Mega Drive version adds several new elements that weren't present in the arcade game, including cutscenes between the levels and a number of additional stages. The game has a more sedentary pace than some of the other games in this list. You don't run very fast and there aren't many explosions, more guarded and well-timed pistol fights. The trick to this game is essentially perfectly timing attacks and dodging enemy bullets. As you go along, you'll pass numerous doors to explore. These contain bullets, weapons or life, and can be a handy way to duck out of the crossfire. There's an impressive number of different enemy types with different attack patterns, and it can take a little learning to distinguish them all. The game on first inspection seems overly punishing and rather frustrating because the player characters feel quite weak. This is one of those games where getting shot will pretty much one-hit kill you, so you need to be damn careful. There's usually a sensible way to tackle the levels, but it can involve a lot of repetition to make sure you time your shots and clear a path. The funny thing is that the enemy AI is pretty dumb. You can enter doors in front of them and generally walk around them without them even noticing. You can learn to use this to your advantage. There's a good number of stages to traverse here, and I find it a pleasantly paced game with a very good difficulty curve. The really impressive thing is the innovative password system though. Instead of impossible to remember combinations of letters and numbers, the passwords here are sentences, meaning one can quite easily restart from a given stage at a later playthrough. I suppose the only drawback is that at times it can feel cheap and a little restricted. For example, you can't jump and shoot at the same time, but on the whole I really enjoy this one, and it's a nice change of pace from some of the more intense shooters. Overall, this is an impressive arcade port and a very fun game to play in 2-player. Highly recommended. Last but not least, we come to another superb arcade conversion, and another of my favourite multiplayer Mega Drive games. This is Sunset Riders, released in 1992 by Konami. The game is one of the best examples of an arcadey shooter on the system, and playing this in 2-player with a friend is as much fun as being in an arcade together. You can play as one of 2 gun toters, Billy or Kumano, and they each have a different feel and style. I tend to like Kumano, who has a heavier scatter shot. The game has a really fun cowboys and Indians feel, and it's beautifully stylised and cartoony. Most of the bad guys look like they're out of a kid's cartoon, and you'll find over-the-top villains as the end of level bosses. The pace in this game is pleasantly fast, though you need to be careful not to be lulled into a false sense of security. If you rush too much, you may come across an unexpected stick of dynamite or a stray bullet that'll pick you off. The game is quite unforgiving, as a single bullet will kill you instantly. This means you need to have your wits about you at all times. There is a nice dodge mechanic in the game. If you slide or hop on the spot, you're invulnerable to damage, though dodging bullets is easier said than done if I'm honest. And there's something so satisfying about swiftly dodging the enemy bullets and clearing the screen. This is another game that I'm glad has an easy mode, because it's pretty much consistently challenging right from the offset. Despite the difficulty, the game's over-the-top sense of humour and fun prevent it from becoming stressful, and if things get too hot, you can always duck into a saloon for a kiss. One of the difficult mechanics in this game is the moving train which passes low posts. If you forget to slide, you'll be killed repeatedly, so you've really got to pay attention to everything that's going on around you. The overall length of the game is nice and short though, so it's a really fun one to play for a little blast with a friend. I've beat it a few times, though always on the easy mode as everything just gets ridiculous in the later stages. You'd also want to get good at the mini-game for sure, so you can catch as many extra lives as possible from the back of that wagon. I think this is such a good example of an aesthetically pleasing run and gun game that doesn't take itself too seriously, but which remains challenging nonetheless. It's well worth checking out. And that was the last game that I had in my list, so I'll bid you goodbye. Thank you so much for watching this video, and please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Take care guys, and I'll speak to you all soon.